The first time I ever played regular Castlevania 64 was on stream, and I constantly heard how I should have just played Legacy of Darkness instead and how much better it was. But I wanted to play the first one first, because if I didn't, then how would I be able to judge Legacy of Darkness? Plus, I just love the Castlevania world, so if I was gonna play it anyway, why not just do it in order? Fast forward a year later and I finally played it. This review is mostly going to be focusing on the first big quest, Cornell's, but I'm also going to take a look at Henry's and Reinhardt's. If you don't know already, Castlevania Legacy of Darkness was released on the Nintendo 64 in late 1999. It was only released months after its predecessor, Castlevania 64, which is pretty crazy to me given that this is an expanded version of the game, with new levels, added enemies, and different characters. It's also a prequel to the first Castlevania N64 game, so it's a little confusing. I always assumed this came out like a few years after the first one, so I was really shocked to learn that there was just a few months in between them. You begin this game by playing as Cornell, a man who can also turn into a werewolf, but a good werewolf, so that's pretty cool. It makes him a little more interesting. You're trying to save your adopted sister, Ada, from Dracula. The narrator in the beginning of the game explains all of this to you, and I can't help but laugh at his delivery.
Cornell uses the man-wolf's acute sense of smell to track the scent of his sister's blood.
To me, it sounds like he's putting on a super condescending tone. You also see a character named Ortega a lot throughout this game, as this is Cornell's old friend and fellow werewolf, but now it's his main rival. Ortega made a deal with Dracula because he wanted to be more powerful, so now he's your enemy. This story takes place before Carrie and Reinhardt's story from the first game, but you can unlock them later after beating the game with Cornell and then with Henry. For Cornell's attack, he throws a scythe, which basically just looks like he's slapping enemies in the face with magic. You can use lock-on when attacking, which helps, but you need to make sure you're facing the right way when using it or else you will not hit the enemy. I know this sounds super obvious, but it's easier said than done sometimes with the camera angles. But I'll get to the camera later. And you can also turn into your Wolfman form when he slashes his enemies with his claws. This does more damage and fewer hits to enemies, but it will drain your jewels, which you also use for your sub-weapons. And once you activate Wolf Mode, you can't turn it off, so it will go on until it uses all of your jewels. So I liked to save it for the bosses. As far as what you do in this game, it's basically lots and lots of early 3D platforming. And depending on the area and if they let you choose the camera angle or not, it's surprisingly not too bad. So let's finally talk about the camera angles. There's Action View, which lets you move the view around. Even though objects get into your line of sight at times, it's the best option and the most used view. Boss View is for bosses, obviously. I sometimes had a hard time with this angle because I felt like I had to constantly jump around in order to attack in the right direction. Maybe it was just a me problem, but I didn't like it. And lastly, Auto View was sometimes used when navigating certain obstacles, like going down platforms. This is when the camera decides the angle it wants you to have, and you cannot change it. This sucked really bad in the first game, and it can still suck in this one too, but there were some improvements with it. The first thing that comes to mind for me when talking about auto view is in the beginning in the Forest of Silence, when you're making your way down the cliff. In the first Castlevania 64, it also used auto view for this area, but I remember it being a lot more awkward. Maybe it was because I was new to the game at the time, but I don't think that was all of it. In Legacy, I got up and down this area with ease. This is an example of just how much the camera angles were sometimes improved in this game. It's not perfect now by any means, but there are moments like this which made me go, wow, this really is a lot better. So back to the platforming. That was the majority of what this game was about. But I didn't totally hate it. Okay, well sometimes I did, but overall it wasn't that bad. I was legitimately having fun with a lot of these obstacles, which was a really nice surprise. This game really focuses on jumping from platform to platform, and depending on the area, some platforms act different than others. This game utilized a lot of slowly sinking platforms, slowly crumbling platforms, and some that just involve tricky jumps. But this mixed with objects trying to kill you and having to practice your balance in some areas made for a pretty fun but sometimes frustrating experience. Like for example, when you're in the art tower, there's a part where you basically have to walk across a tightrope while dodging 2 giant swinging chandeliers. I gotta say, I think Castlevania 4 did the whole chandelier thing a bit better. This part was super frustrating for various reasons, but the thing that pissed me off the most was trying to walk in a straight line without drifting left or right. And sure, maybe there was something wrong with my thumb or the controller causing me to drift, but dealing with this while trying to get the right angle drove me nuts. But the way I finally managed to get across this rope was pretty funny. Yeah, while crouching and walking, I accidentally slid across to the other side. I'm still amazed that I was able to pull that off. It didn't hit me until I was done playing the game and writing this review, but there really aren't a lot of enemies in this game. It sounds weird, but let me explain. Yes, there are the classic Castlevania characters like skeletons, flea men, and bone pillars, but you're mostly all alone until you see a boss or mid-boss. The real enemies are the platforms and the obstacles. And I can't believe I'm saying this because one of my favorite things about the Castlevania franchise is the variety of enemies. But I think it works for this game. Hell, even one of the bosses is a machine. Or I guess I should say it's not a living creature. In the Tower of Science, the boss here was pretty baffling as it's literally called the Crystal Laser of Doom. Maybe I'm crazy, but I was not expecting to be attacked by a giant laser with a bunch of laser and gun turrets around it. I felt like this was one of the more challenging parts of the game, but once I learned to take out the 2 turrets in front of the crystal and spam my attack at the crystal boss, it was doable. The mood in this game is a lonely one, at least for Cornell's portion of the game. You're all alone for the most part while navigating these levels, which adds to the moody vibe, and I like it. I thought they did a good job with mixing atmospherics and music and having a dark color palette without it feeling bleak and miserable. Well, except for the Tower of Ruins. I'll complain about that in a bit. The areas in Castlevania 64 that drove me insane with rage were actually kind of improved here. Like the Tower of Sorcery. When I was playing as Carrie in the first game, that area unleashed a rage inside of me that I didn't even know was possible. It was pure 3D platforming hell with insanely spread out save spots. It almost broke me. Okay, and now I try to make the camera do what I want, and then I go up. No! But here in Legacy, they condensed it and still included most of the elements. I was dumbfounded when I made it through this area basically unscathed and in a very short amount of time. You still deal with floating crystals, disappearing crystals, and liquid crystal monster things. But I guess due to both the camera improvements and the condensing of the stage, it's not at all that frustrating. In fact, I'd say it's one of the easiest parts of the game. I almost feel like they condensed it a little too much, but I shouldn't complain. Another area with a makeover worth mentioning is the Clock Tower. In the first game, this felt like the longest stage ever. And with all of the spinning gears, awkward camera angles, and hard to make jumps, it drove me pretty crazy. But again, they condensed it and fixed the camera for the most part. This stage still had its frustrating moments, which obviously is to be expected since it's a clock tower level in a Castlevania game. There may not be any harpies, but having to continuously jump up spinning towers can take a toll on a person. As it goes for sections of the game that I didn't like, the first thing that comes to mind is the Tower of Ruins. It was mostly a monotonous chore to get through, and also where some minor glitches happened, which I'll talk about in a minute. Now, the first section of the Tower of Ruins I didn't totally hate, despite it not really fitting in the Castlevania world. The whole tower is supposed to make you feel like you're in the underground depths of Dracula's castle, but this felt more like something out of Indiana Jones. Anyway, once I understood what the hell I was supposed to be doing in this very yellow area, and got the hang of using the C buttons to look at this tiny little map that's etched on a rock, I thought it was alright and was actually kind of curious to see what would happen next. But then things got very, very dark. and not fun. The second section of the Tower of Ruins has you running around on crumbling columns and platforms in the dark, and there is nothing interesting about this area. The atmosphere sucks. I get it, you're underground, but this is the most boring area to have to run around. You're jumping from platform to platform, trying not to get hit in the face with falling debris, and figuring out puzzles. Like using clues to decipher which pillar to jump on next. I just hate it. It's not interesting at all in my opinion, but some funny glitches did happen when moving between platforms faster than the game wanted me to. Whoa! 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 And when I jumped on the wrong platform. But overall, I enjoyed the level design in this game and thought that compared to its predecessor, it's definitely an improvement. But it still had some wacky elements, like ledges that didn't look like anything grabbable, at least to me anyway. In the Tower of Ruins, after getting to the top of a pillar, I literally thought I reached a dead end, but nope, it's a ledge. Or there's hidden platforms that you wouldn't know are there, unless you just so happen to walk to the very edge of the space you're on and look down using the C buttons. I thought that was a bit much. Ooh. And lastly, during a boss fight in the Duel Tower, there's a part where you're trying to avoid stepping on lava flowing under a metal walkway. The floor is literally lava! But when I first saw this, I totally thought it was a red carpet design. Which would make sense because Dracula seems to be all about that black and red color scheme. Am I crazy or is it obviously lava? Let me know in the comments what you think. Anyway, this area led me to the next, the Tower of Execution, which I thought was one of the most fun areas of the game. Or maybe at this point I finally lost my damn mind. Parts of it felt like I was in an abandoned version of Bowser's Castle, which was awesome. There's crumbling pieces of what seems to be parts of a castle, creepy faces on walls, and sketchy bridges to cross. I just flat out enjoyed navigating my way over lava and fireball patterns. It was a fun and unexpected area. At the end of Cornell's quest, of course you gotta fight Dracula, but nothing would have prepared me for what the second form was gonna be like. Sure, you had all the stairs to skip up, which is a classic Castlevania thing to do. And much like in regular Castlevania 64, whether or not you fight Renin, the guy you buy things from, depends on how much money you've spent. Luckily, I didn't go on a shopping spree, so I got to go straight to Dracula. But first, I'd like to throw in a fun little fact. Once you make it to the final room where Dracula is, jump into the flame and run around the ledge of the back of the castle where there's some secret power-ups. You get a weapons power-up first, and if you walk the invisible plank, you get a turkey as well. I hate shit like this because it freaks me out. Am I the only person who finds walking on invisible ledges in video games super unnerving? Castlevania 4 did this secret as well, but it wasn't nearly as unsettling to me. But since this is the N64, of course it's gonna get weird. I'm super glad those power-ups are there though, because you will need everything you can get for the end of this game. Anyway, so Dracula's first form is pretty much what you'd expect. Except Dracula is super veiny for some reason and it's kinda gross. He spawns in different areas and you have to dodge his attacks. When he bites you here, it's actually kinda weird because it goes on for quite a long time. I did have some trouble here though with the camera angles since I was trying to keep moving while also facing him in a way that could get a hit in. But again, maybe that's just me. So now let's talk about the second form, which I was not prepared for at all. It's Morphin time! Ah! Out of all the Castlevania games that I've played, this second form of Dracula is by far the gnarliest. And he surprisingly looks pretty awesome and very metal. It's also the hardest second form that I've dealt with in recent memory, which really took me by surprise. I was not ready for this, since I thought most of the game wasn't too difficult. But first, we gotta talk about how this guy looks. He's a gigantic, flying gargoyle-looking man with a face that pops out of his stomach. What? Maybe it's because of the polygonal graphics of the time period and his color scheme, but it always looks like he's a statue that has come to life. And hey, now that I've had some time to think about it, I suppose he's just an N64 version of the second form of Dracula from Bloodlines on Sega Genesis. Anyway, the angle of this fight is really odd. You're off to the side, so the perspective is very weird, and sometimes he seems further away than he actually is. You really have to push up on the control stick when you attempt to get an attack in, or else I found it hard to aim. When they first dropped me into this, he attacked so ridiculously fast that I had no idea what was going on. He fucks you up. If you go into this fight without any power-ups, I honestly don't know how you would be able to do this, but I'm sure someone has. It took me a while, but with a lot of trial and error and some help from the chat, I finally had an idea of what I was supposed to do. He has a lot of attacks in this fight, and learning the patterns and what to expect really takes a lot of time here. He starts with a lightning attack. Then he throws fireballs and ice blocks at you. And then there's a giant batch of wiggly skeleton worms that come at you. That part was pretty amusing. Good job, Dracula. But that's not it, and finally, for the last in his patterns of attacks, he sucks you up and throws you down, which is pretty devastating, both physically and mentally. However, there is hope. When you're first thrown into this mess, the key is to get in 2 attacks here when you're in wolf form. You gotta run to the left, then the middle, and spam the attacks to the tummy face. If you can do this correctly, you can do some crazy damage early on. This fight kicked my ass, but once I understood what to do, I did it. It just took me many, many attempts. What? Oh. Is this really it? I'm like shaking. Oh my god. Oh my god. Oh my god. Once you defeat Dracula, he takes the wolf form out of your body and you save Ada. The ending is pretty long and it gets a little weird. But hey, look! That kid you saved earlier, Henry, is still kicking. Yay! Happy ending for the most part. After this, the first character you unlock is Henry, the boy you saved from the maze earlier. He's all grown up now and decked out in shiny armor and even wields a gun. Yeah, shooting the gun at ghosts and things when you play as him is pretty funny. Anyway, his quest is short and you have 7 days to save a bunch of children from Dracula. The more you save, the more you unlock. From there, you can choose to play as Carrie or Reinhardt to finish out the game. I chose to play as Reinhardt, and I gotta say, this isn't anywhere near as annoying as regular old Castlevania 64. Even the nitro part wasn't that bad. I was floored. But the main thing that caught me off guard with Reinhardt was the Dracula fight. Dracula's first form is the same here as it was with Cornell, but I had a way easier time defeating him this time since I got to use a whip. Or maybe it's just because I was playing this game for so long that my brain finally adapted to it. You don't have to aim perfectly, but you can still get a hit in, which made for a way less sloppy time here than with Cornell. After defeating his first form, you go to exit the castle and down the stairs, but you're stopped dead in your tracks. Malice comes flying down on a freaking unicorn. It really looks like Stormy from Rainbow Bright's horse, actually, so I thought that was cool. But then the castle begins to crumble and you have to run. You don't just have to worry about the stairs crumbling, but you also have to worry about making the jump to the elevator at the end of the staircase in time. Yes, that's right, there is an elevator outside of the building that takes you to the roof. If you're fast enough when you're running back down the stairs, you can just walk onto it. But the chances are that you won't be and you'll have to jump. This would be fine, except that it's at an angle that is off to the side slightly, with a little ledge in front of it. You know, just to make things awkward enough to mess you up. Why? So once you're on the roof of the castle or whatever, this is where you encounter the next form. Malice turns into the next form of Dracula, which is a cool looking anime type guy who's pretty styling. He's not too difficult at all. He just keeps spawning in different places, kind of like his first form, while he's shooting energy blast things at you. The battle mode and lock-on didn't really work here, so that made things a bit annoying. Oh, and be careful not to fall off the roof. And then it's time for the final form. Before you know it, you're in the middle of the desert and you have to fight Dracula once and for all. This time, he's not messing around and turned himself into a giant snake or dragon thing with a centipede bottom. It's pretty gross, but I gotta give them points for creativity. I was able to beat him by just running up behind him and getting as many hits in as I could. I did take some damage as I was being a bit sloppy, but that was just because I knew I had a lot of health upgrades to fall back on. At the end, Rosa becomes human again and all is well with the world. You get your classic, cinematic-style Castlevania ending that leaves things on a positive and uplifting note. After this, hard mode was unlocked. I was playing on normal for this playthrough, and more outfits were unlocked, but I don't really care about those. And then I did try out Carrie on hard mode a little bit, but she already makes things hard since her attacks are pretty weak, so she probably wasn't the best character to test this out with. So overall, I would definitely say that this game is a huge improvement from regular Castlevania on Nintendo 64. The atmosphere is enticing, most of the levels are fun, even if they're a little janky at times, and it kept me wanting to play more. So my advice would be that if you really love the Castlevania universe, then play both Castlevania 64 and Legacy of Darkness so you can see what all the fuss is about when it comes to comparing the two. But if you don't care that much, then at least try to check out Legacy of Darkness. The game is far from perfect, but it's fun and I think it has a reputation way worse than it deserves. As always, thank you so much for watching and I'll see you again next time. Bye!